It is just after midnight on the 13th of June 1994. The peace of the Los Angeles suburb of Brentwood is shattered when the bodies of a man and a woman are found by neighbors at 875 South Bundy Drive. Both have been brutally stabbed to death. Initially, there is no sign of the perpetrator. However, nearby, police find a glove which is covered in blood. The victims' family are informed of their tragic deaths, including the ex-husband of the slain woman. Then, on searching the ex-husband's home, a second matching glove is found in the garden. Surely the killer has been caught red-handed. His name, O.J. Simpson, the man who divided America. The man known to history as Orenthal James Simpson, or O.J. Simpson, was born on the 9th of July 1947 in the city of San Francisco in the state of California. His father was Jimmy Lee Simpson, an employee of the Federal Reserve Bank who in later life came out as being gay and became a part-time drag queen. He died in 1986 during the deadliest phase of the AIDS epidemic in America. O.J.'s mother was Eunice Simpson, who worked as an attendant and later as a technician at a psychiatric ward at San Francisco General Hospital. She separated from her husband when O.J. was a young child. In appearance, the brown-eyed O.J. Simpson was a stocky, well-built and towering presence who was 6 foot and 2 inches tall, a physicality that could assume menacing overtones when he was angry. Nicole Brown, who is central to Simpson's story, herself alluded to this in a secret recording made by a police officer called to the athlete's house to respond to a domestic abuse call in 1993. A year before she was brutally stabbed to death. On the tape, she is heard to say, "He gets a very animalistic look in him. All his veins pop out. His eyes are black and just black. I mean cold, like an animal. I mean very, very weird. And when I see it, it just scares me." When asked to describe him, Simpson's friends often said the same thing, which was that O.J. loved being O.J., a man who needed to be liked, respected, and always in the spotlight. He was a highly narcissistic individual who constantly cheated on his wives. His possessiveness, inflated ego, and sense of self-importance, not to mention his complete lack of empathy and remorse, were personality traits that most shone through on many occasions. Particularly so during the controversial second half of his life, as we will see. O.J. Simpson grew up in a poor neighborhood in San Francisco called Potrero Hill. As a youngster, he contracted a disease called rickets, which affects bone development, causing him to wear homemade braces on his legs until he was 5 years old. This gave him what is defined in medicine as a bow-legged stance, which is when both knees curve outwards, giving rise to a nickname, pencil legs, which the local kids used to tease him with. He developed a reputation as somewhat of a troublemaker during his formative years, which he spent fighting, shoplifting for alcohol, partying, and throwing rocks at buses. Activities that were encouraged by his involvement in local youth gangs. Simpson's athletic prowess was first recognized at the Potrero Hill Recreation Center, where, between the ages of 8 and 16, he was constantly playing sports and in particular baseball and American football. He first impressed as an athlete at Galileo High School, where as a halfback he became a standout player in their football team. This was also the place where he would meet Marguerite Whitley, later his first wife, who started dating him after breaking things off with one of his close friends. During this same period, however, he was arrested 3 times for fighting and stealing, causing many to believe that he was going down the wrong path and prompting an intervention from a famous American football player. Worried that he was throwing his talent away, one of OJ's coaches got in contact with veteran San Francisco Giants center Willie Mays, who paid him a surprise visit in an effort to set him straight. The young firebrand was taken to his enormous mansion in the upmarket area of Forest Hill, where the two talked for a day and where OJ finally realized the wealth he could achieve if he focused on becoming a professional sportsman. Speaking of that event, he would later write, "It was the first time I saw the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow." Following his graduation from high school, OJ attended the City College of San Francisco, a junior college where his incredible running stats first caught the attention of university recruiters. Before long, he was inundated with offers from top schools. But for him, there was really only one choice. As a 10-year-old watching football, he had once witnessed the University of Southern California mascot, Tommy Trojan, gallop onto the field atop a majestic white horse amidst a cacophony of bugle horns and cheers, and from that moment on, he had vowed that this was the school he was going to go to. It was this memory, plus the fact that USC was considered one of the best football programs in America, that made his decision very easy. In 1967, the same year that he married Marguerite, OJ started his college football career at the Trojans, quickly becoming the best running back the school had ever seen in the best team they had ever fielded. Their reign of supremacy started with a bang when they thrashed the University of Notre Dame 24/7 on their home turf, the first time this had been done since 1939. His greatest moment that year, though, occurred late in the fourth quarter in a game against their biggest local rivals, the University of California, Los Angeles, who were leading by 20-14. It was the final play of the game, and the Trojans were deep in their own half with only one more opportunity to turn the score around. With a place in the grand final of the national championships on the line, when the ball came out of the pack, the USC quarterback didn't throw it but handed it to Simpson, who sprinted right, then left, leaving the defenders and his own teammates in the dust to score the all-important touchdown. His team had just snatched victory from the jaws of defeat in the most dramatic of manners. Decades later, the play would still be reverently referred to by fans simply as the run. USC went on to win the national championship, with OJ named player of the game. As a senior, he only got better with his astounding running stats, leading to him being awarded the illustrious Heisman Trophy, an annual prize given to the best-performing college football player. Now somewhat of a media darling, he picked up his first TV credit, a non-speaking part in the TV show Dragnet that marked the start of a glamorous acting side gig he would keep on until the 1990s. In 1969, Simpson was first pick at the NFL draft, landing him a multi-million-dollar contract with the Buffalo Bills, a book deal and commercial endorsements. On the other hand, in contrast to his starring role in his school and college teams, his professional career got off to a rather rocky start. In his first year, he was largely sidelined because his coach preferred a pass-orientated attack. In his second year, he was blighted by injury, and in his third year, the Bills only won a single game. However, this would prove to be a blessing in disguise, for this led to a change in management that saw Bills owner Ralph Wilson reorganize the entire team around his star running back. In 1972, Simpson, whose nickname was the Juice because O.J. also referred to orange juice, at last fulfilled his much-anticipated promise by running 1,252 yards in all games, the best in the league that year, emboldening him to set his sights even higher. The legendary Jim Brown held the record for the most distance run in a single season, 1,700 yards, but Simpson signaled his desire to better this when he proclaimed that he wanted to run 2,000 yards, at that point considered the holy grail of all football accomplishments. The 1973 season began extraordinarily well, when he clocked up an unprecedented 250 yards during the Bills' opener against the New England Patriots, setting a new single-game record in the process. As the year wore on, and he inched closer and closer to sporting immortality, the media began making comparisons between him and Jim Brown, painted so often as a cheerless but dominating presence that steamrolled everyone in his way. Simpson seemed to be the polar opposite, charismatic, upbeat, and preferring to run around his opponents rather than crush them, and more likely to flash a smile while doing so. It was this unsullied and likable image that would define how the public saw O.J., who would go on to achieve a historic 2,003-yard season right up until his arrest in 1994. Having established himself as a footballing icon, he would never again reach the heights of the 1973 season, but he would continue to chalk up impressive statistics until winding down his career at the San Francisco 49ers in 1979. In the meantime, he would continue to act on the side, securing his first prominent role playing African tribesmen in the 1977 ABC miniseries Roots. That same year, he met 18-year-old Nicole Brown for the first time, a former high school prom queen who was working as a waitress at the Daisy, an upmarket nightclub in Beverly Hills the football star frequented regularly. Despite already having a wife and children, the pair rapidly developed a romantic bond, and within months, Nicole had already dropped out of community college and moved into O.J.'s house, a piece of prime real estate called 360 North Rockingham. According to friends, even before they tied the knot, the relationship was passionate, tumultuous, and characterized by frequent fights, with Nicole often returning to her parents' home in tears before a phone call from her lover seemingly put everything right again. In 1979, just as he was finishing up his professional career, Simpson divorced Marguerite. The split wasn't only because his eyes had wandered elsewhere. In late August, their 2-year-old son, Aaron, tragically drowned in the family's swimming pool in an accident that proved to ultimately be the finishing blow to their deteriorating marriage. Over the next decade and more, Nicole lived at 360 North Rockingham with her boyfriend, who regularly cheated on her. It was only when she became pregnant with their first daughter, Sydney, that the couple finally married in 1985, the same year he was inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame. For most of the 1980s, Simpson lived a relaxed lifestyle, playing lots of golf and surrounding himself with an entourage of followers. In addition, after several years as a football pundit with ABC, he began working for NBC Sports in 1989, where he became a popular member of the crew, being the only on-air presenter to give Christmas presents to the behind-the-scenes production team. He was a man who always signed autographs without fuss, who was charming to strangers and who regularly invited cops over to his Rockingham house to hang out, meaning he counted many police officers as his friends. His personal connections with law enforcement would prove very handy in 8 separate 911 calls made by Nicole to complain of domestic abuse at the hands of her husband. For away from the cameras, the ugly reality was that O.J. Simpson was physically violent towards his second wife. The most significant of these incidents happened on the night of the 1st of January 1989, when a disturbing 911 call was made from 360 North Rockingham. Hearing the sound of someone being hit and screaming before the line went dead, 911 operator Sharon Gilbert deemed it sufficiently serious to send police to check it out immediately. Knocking on the door when they arrived, Officer John Edwards and his partner were met by a housekeeper who said that nothing was going on. It soon became apparent she wasn't telling the truth when Nicole staggered out from a nearby bush behind the house gate wearing just a bra and sweatpants. As she hammered the button to open the gate, she shouted, "He's going to kill me," multiple times before collapsing into the arms of Officer Edwards, who quickly ascertained that she meant O.J. Simpson. Her injuries indicated that he had slapped her, hit her with his fists, and then pulled her by the hair. As she was shuffled into the police car, her abuser emerged in a bathrobe and yelled, "I don't want that woman in my bed anymore. I got 2 other women. I don't want that woman in my bed." Claiming he had simply pushed her out of bed, Edwards calmly explained he had to arrest him, to which the furious Simpson replied, "You've been out here 8 times before, and now you're going to arrest me for this? This is a family matter." Nevertheless, despite his protests, the policeman stood his ground, and as Simpson went inside to get dressed, the housekeeper went over to the police car, imploring Nicole to come back inside and even tugging on her before she was batted away. Then, instead of following orders, O.J. sped out of another gate at the property in a blue Bentley, prompting 4 police cars to give chase. But in the end, they couldn't catch up to him. His attempt to escape justice was simply ignored. With Nicole filing a police report, the incident would be the first to spill over into the LA law courts. However, in order for him to be tried for spousal abuse, the police would first have to establish that the abuse was frequent and not a one-off event, a task entrusted to Officer Mike Farrell. Having heard from his colleagues at the scene that Nicole was claiming there had been 8 other incidents, at first he was perplexed to find that no one in the LAPD seemed to have any recollection of these events. Eventually, Farrell found an officer who was willing to talk, and who recounted in a letter how in the fall or winter of 1985, responding to a 911 call, he had discovered Nicole sat in front of a Mercedes-Benz, the windshield of which had been shattered by a baseball bat swing from her husband. Asked if she wanted to make a police report, she refused, as her partner paced up and down the driveway. Having determined it was indeed a recurring event, legal proceedings went forward, ultimately leading to a suspended sentence for Simpson. His punishment involved 24 months of probation, community service, mandatory counseling, a $470 fine, and a $500 donation to a shelter for women, the Sojourn Counseling Center. Coincidentally, the same place Nicole would ring 5 days before she was killed. The whole thing received little media attention, only receiving a brief 142-word article on page 4 of the sports section of the Los Angeles Times. In order to avoid the embarrassment of public litter picking or cleaning hospital bedpans that the community service could often impose, Simpson chose instead to organize a fundraiser for a children's cancer charity. Having got off fairly lightly, the incident was largely forgotten about, although he would later comment on it when it resurfaced on a talk show later in the year by explaining how "we had a fight. We were both guilty. No one was hurt. It was no big deal and we got on with our lives. It wasn't that big of a deal." One might ask why Simpson was afforded the benefit of the doubt to such an extent in the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, when there were what seemed to have been so many red flags surrounding his behavior. The answer is related to his wealth and popularity. Simpson was one of the richest athletes to have ever thrived in professional sport up to that time. He had burst onto the scene in the late 1960s when the amount of money that was being pumped into the NFL and other major American sports was increasing substantially. Moreover, as the most famous football player in the 1970s, he acquired numerous lucrative sponsorship deals with some of the largest companies in America. These included Chevrolet, Hertz, and a wide range of sports apparel and food and drink companies. By the end of his playing career, he had earned millions of dollars, which equates to tens of millions in today's money, while his existing wealth was further increased through reinvestment in hotels, restaurants, and other business ventures. When his subsequent earnings from sports presenting, film and television appearances, and continuing advertising revenue are added in, he was a very wealthy man by the time his relationship with Nicole began spilling over into police reports in the late 1980s. He was also immensely popular. Whatever his conduct in his personal life and behind closed doors might have been, Simpson was perceived as an amiable character by those whom he knew less well, charming and affable. He was also consistently voted as one of the most popular public people in American life. Faced with an immensely wealthy and well-liked individual, it is perhaps unsurprising that many people were unwilling to accept Nicole's claims against her husband in the late 1980s. Police were more inclined to see her as emotionally unstable rather than O.J.'s private conduct as being so at odds with his public persona. Furthermore, the culture in American life at the time was somewhat different then to what it is now, and there was a greater tendency to turn a blind eye to the bad behavior of people in positions of influence like Simpson. In February 1992, 3 years after the police incident early in 1989, Nicole filed for divorce and moved with her 2 children, Sydney and Justin, into the nearby 325 Gretna Way in Brentwood. This particular property also had a guest house, which she rented out to a man named Kato Kalin, whom she had met on a skiing trip to Aspen in Colorado. He often babysat for her children, and they were so fond of him that they would subsequently name their dog after him. He would in time become a firm and dependable friend of the divorcee as she legally jousted with her vengeful ex-husband. Since she had been completely financially dependent on him, having only ever worked as a boutique sales clerk and waitress, and then becoming a full-time mother to their children, she requested child and spousal support, which were duly granted without issue. More specifically, she received a monthly child support payment of $10,000, a condominium in San Francisco she could rent, and a one-time payment of $433,750. Using the lump sum and the proceeds from selling the San Francisco condominium, she bought a 3-story condominium, 875 South Bundy Drive, which she moved into in January 1994. Some of her personal affairs during this time were chaotic in other ways, notably her friendship with Faye Resnick, who had a drug problem. Efforts to smear Nicole in the aftermath of her death would often focus on her alleged heavy drug abuse, but there is actually little evidence to suggest that she abused illegal narcotics. During this period of reinvention, Nicole's relationship with O.J. further soured. The first issue of contention was that Simpson disliked the fact that Kato Kalin had accompanied Nicole to her new home, where he rented a small guest suite sandwiched between the garage and the kitchen in a similar arrangement to the one they had had before. Driven by a possessive desire to remove a potential romantic partner out of the way, he offered Kalin a rent-free guest house at his place in Rockingham. Next, in May 1994, after a last attempt at reconciling failed, the retired footballer threatened to report her to the Internal Revenue Service. This was because, in order to avoid tax, she had falsely told the IRS that the Bundy condominium was a rental property by listing O.J.'s Rockingham mansion as her main residence. Despite the fact that his 2 children lived with her, he was perfectly happy to make them homeless as a way to get back at their mother. In a diary entry from June 3rd, Nicole wrote down word for word what her vindictive ex had said to her over the phone in relation to the matter, which is quoted in full here without the expletives. "You hang up on me last night. You're gonna pay for this. You're holding money from the IRS. You're going to jail. You think you can do anything you want. You've got it coming. I've already talked to my lawyers about this. They'll get you for tax evasion. I'll see to it. You're not going to have a dime left." 4 days later, on the 7th of June, Nicole rang up the Sojourn Counseling Center, where O.J. had been forced to pay a donation some years before, to report that he was stalking her. 2 days after that, she officially put Bundy up for lease to sidestep Simpson's legal attacks. Following this up with a day's house hunting with her friend and bartender, Ron Hardy, during which she agreed to rent a place in Malibu with a view of the ocean. According to Hardy that day, his friend was in good spirits, and he would later recall how, "She said everything's great. She hadn't felt this good in a while. She felt that she had finally put O.J. behind her." Anxious to see the for lease sign put up, she even called her real estate agent on the 10th of June to see if she had got around to it. With everything falling neatly into place, it seemed Brown would finally be getting the fresh start she so desperately needed as a new day dawned on Sunday the 12th of June 1994. The first indication that something terrible had happened on the night of the 12th of June 1994 came at around 10:15 p.m., when panicked barks reverberated around the neighborhood where 875 Bundy was situated. Then at around 10:55, dog walker Stephen Schwab happened upon the Brown family dog, an Akita, who in some distress was barking at a house. Worried it might have been abandoned, he let the dog approach him, and it was in that moment that he noticed all 4 of his paws were covered in blood. Feeling uneasy, he walked home, but the dog followed him and then patiently sat on the landing outside of their apartment, prompting Schwab's wife to give him water. At around 11:40 p.m., the Schwab's neighbor, freelance laser printer repairman Sakru Boztep, arrived back and agreed to keep the dog for the night. But when it became too agitated, he decided to take him out for a walk with his wife. It was during this midnight stroll the dog led them to 875 South Bundy Drive, where, upon looking through the gate, the couple were shocked to see what appeared to be a woman lying in a pool of blood. First on the scene was Officer Robert Risk of the LAPD, who, hovering his flashlight over the path leading to 875 Bundy, illuminated the body of Nicole Brown, which was lying at the base of a short stairway connected to the front door. It soon became apparent that this was double homicide, because slumped to the right of her against a fence was the corpse of a young muscular man called Ronald Goldman, a waiter and aspiring actor who had his shirt pulled over his head. Goldman, a non-romantic friend of Nicole's, who had called over to her place to drop off eyeglasses she had left at the restaurant she had gone to earlier, was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had been stabbed over a dozen times, the fatal blows being in the neck and the chest. Nicole had suffered 7 stab wounds to her neck. Examining the grisly scene closer, at Goldman's feet there was a black hat, a white blood-stained envelope, and a single leather glove, while indented in Nicole's pool of blood was a heel print that seemed to have been freshly made. While there was no sign of any bloody footprints on the passage going up to the front door, there were some on the walkway that stretched across the entire north side of the property, indicating that the assailant had made his escape via the alleyway at the back. Trailing these footprints to the left were what appeared to be fresh droplets of blood, implying that the murderer may have taken off with a cut left hand. When Risk pushed on the front door, it opened to reveal a neat front room that showed no signs of struggle. Peeking into the bathroom, he noticed a bath full of water, surrounded by scented candles that had also been lit in the master bedroom, and when he went to check out the other bedrooms, he found Sydney and Justin fast asleep in each, with both swiftly whisked away to the police station for safety a bit later. Having secured the crime scene, as he radioed for backup and went downstairs, he noticed a letter on the table in the front room that was from O.J. Simpson, whose connection with the house was confirmed by family pictures featuring him. Because of the megastar's close links to the police, a top-ranking official requested that Simpson be personally informed, and so 2 squad cars were sent to his Rockingham residence at around 5 a.m. Approaching the intersection that led into Rockingham Street, they noticed a white Ford Bronco that had been somewhat erratically parked. A couple of seconds later, they were outside the house, which had some lights on inside, but when they went to buzz, they received no answer. By chance, a member of the security firm that safeguarded Simpson's house, Westech, was driving nearby, so the cops managed to get hold of his personal cell number, which they dialed several times with no luck. While they did this, Junior Detective Mark Furman went to check out the suspicious white car, shining his flashlight at the back to see papers addressed to O.J. Simpson, and further observing a small red stain just above the vehicle's handle, as well as some thin red streaks at the bottom of the door. Sensing that something very bad may be happening at the eerily quiet Simpson household at that very moment, Furman opened the front gate after being hoisted over the wall by his colleagues. Making their way over to the guest houses, they came across a groggy Kato Kalin, who appeared to have just woken up and who told officers that at 10:45 p.m. he had heard loud bangs on his south bedroom wall, behind which was a leaf-laden narrow passageway separating the guest houses from the fence that marked the border of Simpson's property. When Furman investigated this thin, unkempt space, he spied another glove that looked remarkably similar to the one found at the male victim's feet. In the meantime, the police interviewed O.J.'s daughter, Arnell Simpson, who was staying in the neighboring guest house and who provided them with a key to get into the main complex, where it was thought her father may be. Once inside, Arnell called her dad's secretary, who reported that her boss had taken a flight to Chicago the previous night, and that he was now staying at the Chicago O'Hare Plaza, and so at 6:05 a.m., the police made contact with O.J. on the hotel telephone to break the terrible news. By all accounts, Simpson seemed devastated by what had happened, but it was what he didn't say that raised eyebrows. For one, he didn't ask when or where Nicole had been killed, and neither did he ask if it was an accident or foul play, simply replying that he would take the first flight back and requesting his daughter to get his best friend, Al Cowlings, to pick up his children from the police station. Meanwhile, back at Rockingham, and aided by light from the rising sun, more strands of evidence were being uncovered, the most notable of which was a spattered line of blood drops leading from the front door to the front gate. The detective then clocked the white Bronco parked nearby and, looking inside, discerned that there was also blood on the console between the two front seats and on the inside of the driver's door. Going back inside the house, he found more blood drops in the foyer, showing that the trail led right to Simpson's residence. The evidence was incriminating, and the time frames also seemed to match, for Simpson had taken an unexpected flight to Chicago and had last been seen at his house at 11 p.m. A search warrant was then issued for 360 Rockingham, just as the suspect was touching down in LA to give his version of events. Interestingly, Simpson had already contacted a criminal attorney by the time he landed. At 12:10 p.m., Simpson arrived back home and was put in handcuffs for questioning, with the arresting officer noticing that there was a bandage on the middle finger of his left hand. At the police headquarters, O.J. claimed that the previous evening he had seen his ex-wife and her parents at a dance recital that their daughter Sydney had taken part in, after which he had made his way back home at about 6:30 p.m. in his Bentley. There he had prepared for his flight to Chicago, which had left at 11:45 p.m. When pressed about his hand, he told them he had broken a glass in Chicago and that this had caused a previous cut to reopen, but when asked how he had originally injured it, he said he wasn't sure. Later on in the interview, however, when asked about the blood in his house, he would change his story and claim that he cut it while hurriedly preparing to leave for the airport. In total, the interview only lasted 32 minutes, and curiously the police made no effort to question the many inconsistencies in his story. All the evidence pointed to Simpson, and this was only strengthened when DNA results came in to reveal that it was a mixture of Nicole's, Ronald's, and O.J.'s blood on the glove found behind Cato's lodging. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and a plan was made to deliver him at 11 a.m. on Friday the 17th. That morning, the media were parked outside of Rockingham, expecting to see the celebrity in handcuffs, but unknown to them, he wasn't there. The night before, his old pal Al Cowlings had helped him escape from the house and spirited him away to the property of one of his lawyers and close friends, Robert Kardashian. After some confusion about his whereabouts, the police were finally informed of his location and arrived at the Kardashian mansion at 12:10 p.m. But when they went inside, the suspect was nowhere to be found. When it became apparent that he had fled, Robert Kardashian came in holding a letter that suggested that O.J. was shortly going to end his own life. What followed was one of the most watched manhunts in American television history, with a total of 95 million Americans tuning in. It was soon established that Al Cowlings was the getaway driver and that he was driving a 1993 white Ford Bronco with O.J. in the back. The pair were first spotted heading north back towards LA on Interstate 5, about 80 miles south of the Kardashians' residence, prompting a nearby police car to follow in pursuit. As the fugitives approached the freeway at Santa Ana, heavy traffic made it come to a complete stop, allowing 2 police officers to surround it with guns drawn. It was then that they learnt from Cowlings that OJ had a gun to his head and was threatening to pull the trigger, compelling the cops to jump back in their car and begin trailing it as a precautionary measure, with the low-speed chase being broadcast live on every major TV network by a tailing media helicopter. Eventually, Cowlings reached Rockingham, having to inch his way past TV vans and crews to get into the driveway. With the world's eyes watching and a sizable crowd gathered outside, Simpson was persuaded to give himself up by a negotiator and by the pleas of his friend Al Cowlings. Setting foot outside, he was clasped in handcuffs shortly before 9 p.m. and bundled into an unmarked cruiser. When officers looked inside the white Ford Bronco, they found the cuffed man's passport and plastic bag containing a fake goatee and a fake mustache. They also picked up the gun, which was registered to a police officer because it had been given to Simpson as a gift from one of his cop friends 5 years prior. After entering a plea of not guilty on the 22nd of July 1994, the trial of O.J. Simpson, dubbed the Trial of the Century, began on the 24th of January 1995 and was broadcast live across the nation. Leading the prosecution were Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden of the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office. The first order of the day was to let the court know of the long history of domestic abuse that Nicole had suffered at the hands of Simpson, both before and after their marriage. This was backed up by the testimony of the victim's older sister, Denise, who recounted the times she had personally witnessed OJ being intimidating, aggressive, and possessive. Further supporting evidence was provided by a harrowing 911 call while she was being assaulted. In the second phase, they presented a number of witnesses to prove that there was a crucial period of time in which Simpson's movements were unaccounted for on the evening of June 12th. Limo driver Alan Park would testify that he had arrived at Rockingham at 10:25 to pick his client up, after which he rang the doorbell over and over and not received an answer. Waiting around, at 11 he claimed to see a large, well-built figure concealed in shadow and wearing dark clothes walk up the driveway and enter the house moments before Simpson emerged, saying he had overslept. When he went into the limo, Park relates how he was clutching a black bag that his client refused to let him touch. Curiously, this particular bag, which may have contained the murder weapon, was never seen again. Next on the stand was the lodger, Cato Kalin, who told those assembled that he and OJ had returned to the house together at around 9:35, having picked up a couple of burgers from McDonald's, after which he didn't see him again that evening, with the only significant thing happening being the loud bangs on his wall at 11 p.m. Another curious detail, which was never explained by the defense, was that at 10:03 p.m. he had called his girlfriend, Paula Barbieri, on the car's cell phone at a time when the accused alleged he was practicing his golf stroke in his backyard. Finally, the prosecution put forward DNA results that linked O.J. Simpson to both the Bundy and Rockingham crime scenes. The most convincing evidence was the fact that the blood found at both could only have come from 1 out of 170 million people, and that O.J.'s blood type was a match. Equally damning was the analysis of blood found on 2 of Simpson's black socks in his bedroom, which could only have come from 1 out of 6.8 billion sources, and which fitted Nicole's profile. Presented with such overwhelming DNA testimony, linking their paymaster to where the murders had taken place, the defense lawyers, known as the Dream Team, and consisting of F. Lee Bailey, Alan Dershowitz, Robert Kardashian, Sean Holley, Carl E. Douglas, Gerald Ullman, and the director Robert Shapiro, who was later replaced with Johnny Cochran, had no choice but to present the argument that the samples had been contaminated or planted. Their scapegoat would be the LAPD, a good choice considering that at the time it was being condemned for being institutionally racist. By 1995, the reputation of the LAPD had been dragged through the mud by scandal after scandal, the most notorious being the 1991 case of Rodney King, an unarmed black man who had been beaten by LAPD officers. The defense's case would rest mainly upon the narrative that Simpson was being framed by racist police officers in an approach that would also be designed to strike a chord with a jury that included 9 African Americans. Their damning portrayal of the LAPD would be augmented by the argument that O.J. Simpson was physically incapable of committing the crime because he suffered from arthritis, and they would also cast doubt on the prosecution's timeline and their presentation of O.J.'s possible motives. On the 12th of February 1995, the judge, jury, lawyers from both sides, and O.J. himself took a tour of both crime scenes with the express purpose of better understanding their layouts. This was seen by the defense as a great opportunity to present the defendant in a much more favorable light, one which would strengthen the overall storyline that Simpson was being set up by a shadowy police conspiracy. In order to give off this impression, a picture of his white girlfriend, Paula Barbieri, was taken down and replaced with an image of a black girl being taken away by police officers. Pictures of Simpson hanging out with his white golf buddies were removed and replaced with those depicting his mother and other black individuals, and a Bible was placed on a table in the full view of the party. Once back in the courtroom, the defense zeroed in on the LAPD by calling on Detective Mark Furman, the officer who had discovered the bloody glove behind Kato Kalin's guest house on that fateful night, to the stand on March 15, 1995. When asked if he had ever used racial slurs, the policeman denied he ever had, setting the scene for one of the most famous and effective episodes of courtroom drama to ever occur. To disprove the witness's assertion, the defense presented an audio tape that had been made when Furman was acting as an advisory role for a screenwriter, Laura Hart McKinney, who had been working on a police TV drama. In the recording, he was heard to say the N-word multiple times, opening the way for the defense to argue that Furman, driven by racial hatred, had taken the glove from the Bundy crime scene, dipped it in Nicole's blood, and deposited it outside Rockingham to implicate Simpson. Having turned the narrative on its head, O.J.'s lawyers also raised questions about the prosecution's DNA evidence by bringing in forensic expert Henry Lee, who impressed the jury by contending that there were problems with some of the blood spatter demonstrations, and that the shoe print evidence implied there were 2 assailants rather than 1. The nail in the coffin for the prosecution was provided by their own team via one devastating miscalculation attributed to Christopher Darden of the attorney's office. He requested that Simpson try on the gloves used to murder Nicole and her friend, and when he did so, it was shown to be too small to fit his hand. This prompted the lead defense lawyer, Johnny Cochran, to quip, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." Later on, it was established that the glove had probably shrunk in size because of the blood, but by then it was too late. The only line of argument that failed spectacularly was the claim that O.J. was so riddled with arthritis that he couldn't possibly have pulled it off. This was easily disproven when the prosecution presented videos shot shortly before the homicide in which he was shown to be leading intense physical exercises. But nevertheless, this didn't exert much influence on the overall verdict. On the 3rd of October 1995, after deliberations lasting only 3 hours, it was announced that the African-American-dominated jury had found Simpson not guilty. Exonerated in criminal court, Simpson would subsequently have to prove his innocence in another trial, as the families of Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman filed a civil lawsuit against Simpson that would this time have a more racially mixed jury. Taking place over the course of 3 months, the bumbling O.J. was forced to take the stand for the first time, during which he failed to adequately explain why the physical evidence pointed to him. Furthermore, the presiding judge in this civil trial, Hiroshi Fujisaki, had barred Simpson's defense counsel from using the police conspiracy theory that had worked so well for him before. After 17 hours of deliberation, the jury found him responsible for the wrongful deaths of Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman, a verdict which required him to pay a total of $33.5 million in damages to their families, and which led to Simpson having to declare bankruptcy shortly afterwards. Simpson had avoided prison at the end of his criminal trial. Still, his life entered free fall in the second half of the 1990s following it. While he was found innocent, most people knew that he was guilty as charged and had, to all intents and purposes, only avoided being found guilty because of the racially charged atmosphere in Los Angeles in the 1990s, after the LA riots of 1992. Had it not been for this, Simpson would almost certainly have been found guilty. There were even jurors who, in subsequent years, more or less admitted that they had voted to acquit Simpson despite being fairly sure that he was guilty based on the Rodney King trial in 1993, a man that had experienced police brutality after a high-speed pursuit while he was driving heavily intoxicated. In the aftermath of the trial, friends and those who provided O.J. with work and advertising revenue in the years after his playing career ended now shunned Simpson. In many cases, the golf courses and clubs he used to attend could not revoke his membership or access. It was simply that he stopped going there after a time when old friends and acquaintances would no longer speak to him. Simpson agreed to a number of high-profile interviews in the aftermath of the trial in an effort to improve his reputation, yet these were of no use. And the situation was further compounded when he was found guilty in the civil trial and his financial situation was destroyed without any means of acquiring the lucrative broadcasting or advertising work he was previously able to rely on. Polls indicated that 3/4 of Americans believed that he was guilty of the murders, while the appearance of several high-profile books in the late 1990s outlining where the prosecution case had gone wrong and why he should have been found guilty compounded the public perception of Simpson as a murderer. There was even a book entitled Madame Foreman, published by several of the jurors, in which they admitted that they believed Simpson was guilty, but felt that there was a reasonable doubt based on the evidence of the glove not fitting and other particulars. Hence, while Simpson was acquitted in the criminal trial, between the guilty verdict in the civil trial and his being found guilty in the court of public opinion, he was never able to return to the life he had lived prior to murdering his ex-wife and Ronald Goldman. In the years after his trial, O.J. Simpson continued to get himself into hot water with the authorities following a move to Florida. the only state where assets such as properties and pensions can't be seized to pay civil fines in other states, as he hadn't yet fully paid out the compensation to the Goldman family, who would spend the next few decades chasing it up. In December 2000, he was once again in the spotlight, this time for a road rage incident in which he had reached into another man's car, grabbed his sunglasses from his face, and scratched his skin, in an incident that saw Simpson potentially facing between 2 and 16 years in jail for burglary and battery. Acquitted in October 2001 on both charges, 2 months later he was on the police's radar yet again for a completely different type of crime. That December, his Florida home was raided because police suspected him of being part of a drug and money laundering operation. However, in the end, they could not find anything to indicate he was involved. Next, in July 2002, he got into trouble for speeding through a protected zone for manatees in a powerboat near downtown Miami. Deciding to plead not guilty instead of paying the small $65 fine, at first he didn't show up to his court appointment, forcing the judge to briefly issue an arrest warrant that was nullified when it was discovered that his attorney hadn't shown up earlier in the day because of a scheduling mix-up. The former football star was eventually forced to pay a $130 fine instead. 2 years later, he was accused of using an illegal electronic device called a bootloader to pirate satellite TV signals, for which he was ordered to pay a $25,000 fine. Finally, in 2007, he was revealed to owe a total of $1.44 million and was named and shamed as one of California's biggest tax evaders. Having been dogged by financial and legal difficulties for more than a decade, in 2005, Simpson looked to cash in on the controversy surrounding him by getting in touch with a publishing house called Reagan Books, an offshoot of HarperCollins. His proposal was to write an account of how he hypothetically could have murdered Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman, leading to the inclusion of the word "if" in the title, "If I Did It." Employing ghostwriter Pablo Fenves, who had lived a few doors down from Nicole and who had actually testified against him in the trial by saying he had heard a dog barking at the time of the homicides, Simpson essentially presented himself as the victim by painting himself as a normal, well-adjusted guy driven to murder by a flagrantly immoral wife, making sure to stress that what he was saying was hypothetical. In an unreleased interview, he claimed that on the night of the murders, while at his daughter's recital, he was first angered by the fact that Nicole was wearing a short skirt he didn't approve of. Then, running into an old buddy, he became furious when he was informed that his ex-wife was hosting wild sex parties at her house. Concerned for his children, he drove over to her place in a car that had a knife hidden under the seat to confront her, but he wasn't alone. Accompanying him was an individual he called Charlie, who was carrying the knife, which eventually ended up in OJ's hand and which was used when things spiraled out of control. Since there had been nothing to suggest that Simpson had had an accomplice, many believed that the inclusion of the fictitious Charlie was just another means of further distancing himself from the crime. At the end of the interview, he made it seem that the killings could have been prevented if Nicole Brown had been a better mother and less hedonistic individual, and that he was the real victim in all of it because his life had been ruined. When the interview and book were announced, there was a massive public outcry that eventually led to the cancellation of both. In the end, Simpson's outrageous attempt to profit from the tell-all book would come back to haunt him when the family of Ronald Goldman, who still hadn't been paid in full after the civil trial years earlier, managed to secure ownership rights to the manuscript. In 2007, with profits going directly to them, they released If I Did It under a new title, If I Did It, Confessions of the Killer, making sure to format the word if in a different font and color to make it appear as if the author was actually confessing. In the aftermath of this fiasco, Simpson became even more unhinged. On the evening of September 13, 2007, he burst into a room at the Palace Station Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas with several gunmen, told those inside that they couldn't leave, and then proceeded to steal several pieces of his own sports memorabilia, which he claimed were rightfully his. The truth of the matter was that they had been taken from him after he had attempted to hide them from the Goldman family, who wanted them as part of the compensation owed to them. On the 16th of September 2007, he was arrested and his trial, which only went on for a month, commenced on the 8th of September 2008. Found guilty of all 12 charges leveled against him, Simpson was sentenced to a maximum of 33 years, being made eligible for parole after 9 years. Between 2008 and 2017, while incarcerated at the Lovelock Correctional Center in Nevada, he lived a comfortable existence, playing fantasy football and watching NFL games on a 13-inch flat-screen TV installed in his cell. He also coached softball, leading his team, which he nicknamed the Giants, to the championships 2 years in a row, and he was generally viewed as a peacemaker who stopped racial tensions between inmates from boiling over. In October 2017, he was released after displaying good behavior throughout his time in the prison system, after which he moved into a gated community in an affluent area of Las Vegas. Over the next couple of years, he kept a comparatively lower profile than before. He could occasionally be spotted at movie premieres, boxing matches, glitzy ceremonies, restaurants and other places like his local farmers market in and around the Las Vegas area. The only time he caused a ruckus was when he was asked to leave the Cosmopolitan Hotel Casino in 2021, after staff claimed he was being disruptive, compelling Simpson to audaciously proclaim that he was going to sue them for $100 million. Throughout this time, he also maintained an active presence on Twitter, posting anything from political and sports opinions to views on the coronavirus pandemic, and it was also through this platform that Simpson would give regular health updates when he announced in May 2023 that he had contracted cancer. When rumors began surfacing in February 2024 that he was in hospice care, he posted a video denying it was true and claimed he was in robust health. Yet this was clearly not the case, for on the 10th of April 2024, O.J. Simpson died at 76 years of age, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. Simpson was cremated in a ceremony in downtown Las Vegas a week after his death. Plans for a memorial were mooted, but have not been followed through on since. The Brown and Goldman families pressed for his remaining assets to be dispensed towards paying the outstanding money still owed to them from the civil suit of the 1990s. Yet some of his wealth was passed on to his family via the very unusual method of having his cremated remains turned into valuable diamonds, assets which subsequently could not be reclaimed as part of Simpson's debts. Normally, a person is remembered in popular culture after their death. However, this was not the case with Simpson, a figure who had featured widely in films, television series, books and podcasts, ever since the infamous trial 30 years before he died. As early as 1995, Fox aired a series entitled The O.J. Simpson Story, while a major BBC documentary followed in 2000. The most comprehensive account of his life and the murders was the 7.5-hour-long documentary O.J. Made in America, released in 2016. This was the same year that The People vs. O.J. Simpson, American Crime Story aired on Fox, one of the most comprehensive acted accounts of the whole affair. As noted, there was even an interview with Simpson undertaken in 2006, which aired in 2018, in which he provides hypothetical details of how he might have carried out the murder. It is now viewed as being a very thinly veiled confession. Few other individuals in American life have been as extensively depicted on television and screen during their own lifetime as was O.J. Simpson. Well over 24 books were also published on his case before he died. Born into a working-class family in a poor San Francisco neighborhood, as a child and teenager, O.J. Simpson was always getting into trouble, but his saving grace was sport. Playing as halfback for his high school football team, his eye-catching performances there first indicated he had the potential to go fully professional. What followed was a rise that would see Simpson become a University of Southern California legend when he scored the winning touchdown in a tense semi-final standoff against local rivals. Awarded the prestigious Heisman Trophy in his senior year, he was catapulted to fame and fortune when he was chosen as first pick in the NFL draft. In 1973, he became part of the pantheon of NFL greats when he pulled off a historic 2,003-yard season. It was towards the end of his career when he first met 18-year-old Nicole Brown. It was their extramarital affair, plus the terrible accidental drowning of his infant son, that prompted him and his first wife, Marguerite, to separate in 1979. Throughout the 1980s, Simpson lived a carefree life of leisure, doing the occasional bit of acting and football punditry and starring in commercials, all of which reinforced his approachable, happy-go-lucky public image. However, behind the carefully constructed front lay a much darker truth, one that involved at least 9 domestic abuse 911 calls made by his terrified wife. His divorce from Nicole followed in 1992, but Simpson was not done with her yet. On the night of Sunday the 12th of June 1994, his ex and her friend Ronald Goldman were found stabbed to death. With O.J. the prime suspect, when officers moved to arrest him, he instead took off on the run, leading to the most watched police chase in American television history. What followed was one of the most infamous trials of the 20th century, at the end of which Simpson was acquitted of 2 counts of murder when his dream team of lawyers successfully convinced the African-American majority jury he was being framed by racist cops. Judged guilty in a follow-up civil case brought against him by the Brown and Goldman families because of the indisputable physical evidence linking him to the crime scenes, he was forced to pay $33.5 million in reparations for their murders. Afterwards, Simpson continued to exhibit criminal behavior before coming back into the limelight when it was announced that he was releasing a book which outlined how he could have hypothetically killed Brown and Goldman. This shameless money grab backfired when Goldman's family published it under the title "If I Did It, Confessions of a Killer." A year later, Simpson's luck finally ran out when he organized a botched robbery of his own sports memorabilia, landing him in jail for 9 years. Released in 2017, he spent the remainder of his life in Las Vegas before his death from cancer in 2024. Very few people today doubt that he killed Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman. Indeed, one of the most damning post-trial comments came from Simpson's longtime agent and friend, Mike Gilbert, who recounted that one evening, on asking Simpson whether he committed the murders, Simpson said to him that Nicole would have still been alive if she had not opened the door with a knife in her hand. What do you think of O.J. Simpson? Do you think his celebrity status and wealth, combined with the racially charged tensions in LA in the 1990s, helped him avoid justice, or was it the case that the jury really did believe that he was innocent of Brown and Goldman's murders? Please let us know in the comment section. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.